Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Hi, this is Gabe Lyons. Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas podcast, where every week we're trying to bring you thoughtful ideas from leaders all over the world who care a lot about Christians better engaging our world, doing it faithfully, doing it winsomely, but also doing it with a deep understanding of the kind of context that we're all trying to navigate. And this week will be no different, but really pierce the soul and the heart a bit. We're listening to Scott Sauls, who just delivered a talk called The Secret of Being Content. Now, you talk about the idea of contentment, and being content in our culture, in our world, is something that's very challenging because everything around us is screaming that we need more, that we don't have enough, that we need to get the things that we see in front of us that we want to achieve, or maybe it's ambition that drives our lack of contentment. But all around us, we can see a lot of people who lack contentment, and that might be you. It might be you today. You're striving for something. You're pushing to achieve something more, or there's that grass is greener idea that if I could just be there, if I could just get that job, if I could just live in this city, if I could just have that boyfriend, girlfriend, or if I could just be married, then I would be content. And Scott wants to press into that today, press into our heart, press into how our emotional and spiritual health are processing through this idea that contentment really comes from getting things versus who we are becoming. And so it'll be challenging, but it'll also be, I think, something that helps you process maybe some of those emotions that at this point, maybe you've not had a chance to think through it in this way. And he references Tim Keller. The cool thing about Scott Sauls and his story is he spent a lot of time in New York City. In fact, he helped as part of leading teaching pastor at one of Redeemer Presbyterian Church's locations in the Upper West Side of New York City under Tim Keller. And he got to know Tim very well. Tim was really a mentor to him before Scott left to come to Nashville to be the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church, at which point, over 9 years ago, as a pastor, he began to start to share his own stories, his messages, begin to write his own books. His most recent book, Beautiful People Don't Just Happen, is an inspiration for what he's talking about today. And as you listen in, he'll even recall, why do we love Tim Keller? What is it about someone like Tim who's lived a good life, who's been respectable, who's stayed married, who's been faithful? What does it look like for someone like Tim to be a leader at that level, but also have a deep contentment in his heart? I hope you'll be encouraged as you listen to this. I know you will be, and I look forward to seeing what it starts to stir up in you.
Well, as most of us know, the Apostle Paul famously wrote, "I have learned the secret." I've learned the secret of being content in every situation. What's notable about what Paul writes there is that contentment is not a natural thing. He says it's a secret that has to somehow be learned. And the other thing that he's clear about is that contentment is also not circumstantial. It's really meant to be immune from circumstance. And interestingly, he says, I've learned the secret of how to face living in want, and also, curiously, how to face living in plenty. There are a couple of insights there that I'd like to share with you. First, it's possible to have every success imaginable and lack contentment. We learn that from a young, powerful man and an old, powerful man in the Bible, the rich young ruler. The question that he comes to Jesus with is, what do I still lack? I have everything, including moral virtue, including faith, lots of money, lots of power. What do I still lack? And then we get the man in Ecclesiastes, who would be the ancient version of a man who has crushed it. Sex, money, power, all kinds of success. He doesn't just have a pool, he has many pools. He doesn't just have a garden, he has multiple gardens. He's crushed it. And the way that he describes all of the things that he has achieved, he says it's like holding a ball of smoke in your hand. He says it's all vanity. The literal word from the Hebrew is it's all vapor. It's like trying to contain a ball of smoke in your hand. There's just no way to do it. Eventually it's going to all evaporate. And both of these men from the Bible are tapping into something that the playwright Tennessee Williams later called the catastrophe of success. The catastrophe of success. Thomas Merton put it this way: so many people live their entire lives climbing the ladder of success, only to realize that at the very end, the ladder has been leaning against the wrong wall. It's the tragedy of getting what you always wanted and then discovering it's not what you want. What we want is never enough. There's no finite dream that can ever be big enough, if realized, that it will be able to occupy the infinite soul of a human being created in the image of God as the crown of creation. There's nothing lower than you, which is essentially everything in creation, that will be able to occupy the grandeur of your magnificent soul. So the British atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell saw this as well, but he spoke especially to those who might regard themselves as influencers or want to be influencers. He says, beware, because influencers are not immune. Even after they've reached the top, they're not immune from a lust for more. And he says this: if you desire glory, you may envy Napoleon, but Napoleon envied Caesar. And Caesar envied Alexander. And Alexander envied Hercules, who never existed. It's a goose chase. This chase for significance, this chase for identity, this chase to justify our own existence through success, through crushing it, through making a name for ourselves, through being an influencer. Nothing wrong with being an influencer. There's a lot wrong with hanging your hat on that. It's no wonder that Paul also said that living in plenty is something we have to learn to face, because it never delivers on what it promises. It never does. But the second thing is, it's also possible, and here's the good news, it's possible to be in a ditch and have the greatest contentment that you've ever had in your life in the ditch. You know, Paul's location, interestingly, when he writes Philippians, which is widely and globally known as the Epistle of Joy, his writing location is prison. And he's been unjustly incarcerated for three things: loving God, loving his neighbor, and preaching Jesus. And the remarkable thing about Paul writing from prison is that there's not a shred of despair, not a shred of victimhood, not a shred of cynicism or grumbling that can be found in him. The closest to home example of this in my world is Tim Keller, whom Gabe mentioned in the introduction to my talk. Tim has been a friend and a mentor to me for over 15 years now, and he's a very dear person to me. He's the only pastor that I'm aware of that has ever made it onto Forbes' top 50 most influential people in the world list. And he cares nothing about that. Nothing at all. Tim was an influencer before influencers were a thing. He cares nothing about being an influencer. He cares nothing about having a brand. What he does care about is maintaining the kind of condition in his soul where he can continually be shy about himself and boastful about Jesus. That's always been his life mission. Now, some of you may have read his interview with Tish Warren in the New York Times recently. And the question now that he's facing living in want. He's facing an incurable form of cancer, pancreatic cancer. And one of the questions was, what are your goals now as you look at your last lap or two of life? And he says, first, to focus, because I realize more now than ever that time is short. Second, to know the Lord, because I need to be prepared for that day when it comes. Third, I want to improve my marriage. He's in his mid-70s, wanting to still improve his marriage. Fourth, to spend as much time as my kids and grandkids as I can. Fifth, I want to continue to write, to leave, and I love this phrase, such a lovely phrase, to leave messages in a bottle for the future church. Then finally, I want to encourage people. I want to be an encourager. In every conversation I have been in with Tim in the last handful of months, the question has always come up, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And even with a chemo drip in his arm, he'll say, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. What's the secret there? Sharon alluded to it in the talk right before mine. Proper formation. And it's through the boring stuff, you guys. It's not through the spectacular, miraculous, worship on a hill stuff, seeing the second heaven as the Apostle Paul did. It's through the boring, ordinary, forgettable stuff. That's how formation happens. Our worship director, Nathan Tasker, once asked me, Scott, how many meals in your 50-plus year life do you remember? And I said, maybe 10. He said, if those are the only 10 meals that you look to sustain your entire life, where would you be now? I would be planted in the ground. It's the meals I don't even remember that have kept me alive and vibrant, and really the boring ones, the healthy ones, that have kept me going. It is the same with character. It is the same with this secret of being content. I can do all things through Christ, Paul says. That's the secret, who gives me strength. How do you get Christ? He also writes about that in Philippians. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. He doesn't say work on your salvation. He doesn't say work for your salvation. That's already been accomplished by Jesus Christ. The burden is lifted off, but work it out in the same way you work the muscles that you already have in your possession out at the gym. Work it out so it will be strong for those times when you need it most. For Tim Keller, that's meant for over 60 years every day praying through 5 of the Psalms. Through the Psalms once every month, reading through the entire Bible at least once every year, having a robust life of prayer every single day, and being very humble even with unfair criticism. This is a guy who, with unfair criticism, says, I even want to look for a kernel of truth in an unfair criticism, lest there might be something to repent of and use it to draw close to Jesus through it. That's how formation happens. Some of you are very gifted. God have mercy on you. God have mercy on you in this, lest you plant your life's ladder against the wrong wall. And on the flip side of this, I pray also that God would grant you the grace to learn the secret of contentment so that you will be able to face hardships when they come your way, and so that you will be able to face success when it comes your way. Thank you.
Well, I hope that stirred you. I hope it made you process in your own world. Are you content? What are the things that ought to make you content? I loved his quote. He said, contentment is not a natural thing. It's a secret that has to be somehow learned. Contentment is not circumstantial. It's supposed to be immune from circumstance. I think about that with the word joy, that it's immune from circumstance. We're all going to be faced with trials, tribulation, circumstances, unfortunate things that happen in our life, but our response of contentment and joy is something that actually keeps us rooted and grounded. And so I hope today, wherever you're at, whatever you might be walking through, that this has just been an encouragement to you, that the secret to being content is something that you can find and that you can experience. I hope you have a wonderful week.